Okay, let's move to the parent leadership. We've got a great report coming forward from some board members and others who attended this Dynamite conference. So I'm not sure who's going to make the opening remark. Mrs. Wilhelm.
I'd just like to thank everyone for the opportunity to pick up this part of the presentation. We had intended to have the report that Dr. Banikowski and Luann Hermich gave on our current parent level of involvement activities, which I think you can see are very comprehensive, and then to link that to the next step that we're taking as a school district to look for ways to involve all parents, even though we have a high percentage, and to have them take on an opportunity to work with us together to improve the academics of our students. And I'd like to thank Mike Poland, a board member, who found an opportunity for us to go to some special training that we came back very excited. Tonight, Stephanie Dansko was supposed to be here with us. She's the principal at Central Elementary School. She went to the conference with us, and her husband was hospitalized today, and so she was unable to be with us. And I'll make some of her remarks towards the end in a concluding way that I think would share a little bit of her excitement as well. So I think, Mrs. Wilhelm, are you leading off?
Thank you for the opportunity to present this exciting information. This was first presented at the district site council meeting on March 7th and in a breakout session, and we were so excited when we walked into the room and realized that the room was crowded with parents, and so it immediately told us that this was of interest to our parents too. We have to ask the question, what led to seeking information about a parent leadership initiative? When we looked at three facts, first of all, parents are partners in their child's education, and that has been communicated in many ways, many times in Olathe, and I think the presentation that was just given is a true reflection of that. But we also looked that we have educators who are highly trained to teach many different personalities and learning styles, and so we talked about, gosh, does that just involve the students, or could that involve parents too? And quickly came to the possibility that it probably could involve parents in that partnership of training. And then finally, we looked at educators with the challenges of No Child Left Behind and the high expectations in education that should be there and are there. Educators have a need for help both at home and at school, and who better to help with that than our parents? We looked at also, and this was provided by the district, and there are many more than what's listed on here. Obviously, these are just a few highlighted. You had the opportunity to hear many more of the ways that our parents are involved in the presentation just previous to ours. But again, just a reflection of the ways that parents are involved at this point in a variety of different ways with our students and in the community. But we also said, but could and should there be more of an in-depth analysis of a greater opportunity? In other words, stepping to that next level of what does it look like to provide parent leadership? I know if we talked with Dr. Banikowski, or if we talked with many of you that work with parents in the district, you would immediately raise your hands or give us a long list of parents who are potential leaders in this district. So it was important for us to look at, can we go that next step to look at the leadership that might be there. We're very thankful that the district provided us the opportunity to go to San Antonio in February. And those that attended were Principal Stephanie Dansko, who's at Central Elementary, also board member Mike Poland, and Dr. All and myself. And when we looked at, and Mr. Pullen found that information for us and certainly pursued about developing parent leaders. And so we went to a two-day session with a group called the Center for Parent Leadership. And there were 32 of us involved. We were thrilled, I think, when we walked in because we weren't sure what that involvement would look like. A room of 32 meant that we got a lot of personal responsibility, but also personal interaction and reflection with people across the nation. That, too, I think was very exciting, something that we weren't expecting, and it did happen. I want to tell you a little bit about the conference. First of all, kind of a summary of the purpose. The Center for Parent Leadership, its purpose is to build partnerships with our teachers and principals. And this is what graduates, and these are parent graduates that worked with us beside the leaders for the Center for Parent Leadership. And they also said to persuade other parents to get involved. And they gave personal reflections and personal accounts of how they had stepped back originally and were not wanting to be a part, but stepped forward, and how long and how important their leadership has been in the particular states and communities that they've been involved in. And then to implement strategies to help all children reach higher levels of learning. And that looked not just at what we might sometimes traditionally think parents can do, and that is to work in the school, but it looked more at looking at data and really looking at how you can look at that data and look at the school improvement plans and help to work hand in hand with teachers and the staff in making those improvements, and then leveraging outside funding. And we heard about some of the funding that came on board and some of the things that they've done in some of the states to get funding to provide the school improvement projects that they've done. These are some of the quotes, a parent quote, and when we looked at NCLB and the higher expectations for public education, so important to hold parents accountable for these high expectations, and also creating a partnership. This is some of the responses that they had. And part of them said, they really looked and said, it gave me confidence to be in this leadership role. It helped me to learn the responsibility to be an active parent, and also to provide that leadership. These are things that I don't think they necessarily felt they had the courage or the ability to do. One of the other things that a parent said was, this was a parent who had worked in Kentucky, and again, she talked about the higher expectations and the progress that they made. And she was, I have to reflect, she was a real, for lack of a better word, a go-getter. I mean, she was really involved throughout the conference with us in talking about what could really be done. She was a single parent with a child, and she had been involved probably at least 6 or 7 years and had moved toward the Center for Parent Leadership and had joined them because she'd made such an impact in the state of Kentucky. When we talk about the we believe, you have to look at 4 important words in those statements. One has to do with want, another has to do with can make a difference, another has to do with accountability and parent responsibility. So if you look at those 4 bullets, you know that parents do want those experiences for their students, that they can make a difference, and the word achievement is so important, again, and holding schools accountable for that achievement, and then a responsibility we know that's there for parents. Besides the belief statements has to come the need part. And when you look at the need, you look at being a decision-making partner. And again, if you reflect sometimes what we look at as parents' involvement in our schools, we're trying to move that one step further in the decision-making process. And also looking at the fact that they really are consumers of education. We talk about consumers and parents in a variety of different roles. We need to now make sure that we're thinking of them as consumers of education. And then another pertinent word is advocates for continuous improvement for our kids. And then finally, leaders in reaching out to other parents. What does the research show? Of course, when you talk about a belief and a need, there has to be research that substantiates why you want to do and move forward and look at change or an initiative. Part of that research was already provided in the previous presentation that was given, but if we look again, that we know that children are more successful if they have parents involved. We know that the high standards and accountability should transcend across our schools and community. We also know that supporting the need for parent involvement is something that most or all of us look at as an initiative. More research, again, talks about the homeschool partnerships. And an important word is it's all families across all economic, racial, and ethnic and educational backgrounds for all students, beginning at our preschool and ending at our high school. And finally, probably the most important key, and that's to look at how it's linked to student learning. That again, parent-community involvement focused on improving student learning really looks at analyzing the data and looking at the great effect of achievement on, and it's said that this is more important than any other process that we look at, and that's looking at achievement, having families and staff and parents involved in improving that student achievement. You must be asking yourselves how. We talked about the whys, we talked a little bit about the research, now comes the how, and I'd like to introduce Mike Pullen.
Thank you, Linda. I too would like to thank the district for allowing us to attend the session down there. I was especially proud that one of the topics we covered down there was how to get the school board and the superintendent on board with you on this program, and I was proud to be able to say I brought mine with me. So they were very impressed. So anyway, moving on, as the statement was made in Dr. Banikowski's thing, presentation, the primary predictor of school success, family involvement, is a very key factor. More families and educational programs work as partners, the higher the student achievement and the higher the program quality. While we're down there, Linda sort of coined the phrase here that parents are a natural resource of us in the school district. And you know, we've already found out how successful we are with using our resources. Think what we can do if we can harness the power of parents with us. New definition of parental involvement. It's time for parent leadership, not just involvement. Parent leadership is parents identifying problems, partnering with the schools, and using the parents to help create the solutions. Key thing there is responsibility, once again. We need to recognize that the parents have a responsibility, and the parents, we need to keep identifying them having them recognize the fact that it is their responsibility to lead the success of the school district. In the presentation at the district site council, basically I advise the teachers and the staff there that as paid people, it's a little difficult for you guys to go out and tell parents that it's their responsibility to stay involved in the school. I can do that. They can cut my salary all they want to. Parents do need access to good data. Part of the program is to help people recognize the data that's available to them, give them the ability to analyze it, and then recognize what they can do with that data. And so that's part of the program, is to help them become involved in meaningful ways. What are the academic expectations? We expect parents to understand the education system. Once again, one of the things I liked about this program was they weren't afraid to use the R word, the responsibility word, okay? Parents have a responsibility to stay involved, and I like that. Brings parents and schools together, creates family-friendly schools. We expect them to take action to improve student achievement, discuss a state standard-based education system. The data's there. We need to help parents identify it and help them recognize what they can do with it. And then design part of the program, the requirements of what the participants in a program will do is to design and implement a project. Actually see something in the school district that they want to make a difference, want to change, and go round up the resources to do it. What's been learned in the 30 years of research that this group has compiled together? Number one, the power of data, the power of open, honest communication between school districts and parents. The desire of all parents. Once again, as Linda recognized, all social economic conditions, all racial, ethnic groups, everything, all parents want their kids to succeed, okay? And so we want to give all parents the ability to participate. The strength of sharing, the power of high expectations of parents, schools, and students. I don't think there's any problem recognizing the high expectations we have in this district And if we can help the parents understand, continue to understand that and be a participant in that, it's just going to strengthen what we've already got going here. When parents and school staff work together to support learning, what happens? Students earn higher grades. They enroll in higher level programs, and we're enabling them to do that. They're promoted more and earn more credits, adapt better to school and attend more regularly, have better social skills and behavior. They graduate and go on to higher levels of education. You know, we've got so many things going on here. If we can adapt, bring the parent leadership in there as another part of the equation, we can just move to even greater heights. What we're calling for is total support. Looking at effective programs that will engage families and the community to embrace a philosophy of partnership. We are partners. You know, we've all been challenged to educate the students here as parents and as educators, and we need to do it as partners. Responsibility for children's education development is a shared, collaborative enterprise among parents, school staff, and community leaders, members. We want to embrace the diversity. You know, we've got it here in Olathe. Let's go grab hold of it and use it to our advantage. Parental involvement programs that are effective engaging diverse families, they recognize and respect and address cultural and class differences. Getting buy-in from educational stakeholders. We do realize that educators have limited expectations sometimes of what parents can do. With the emphasis on testing and No Child Left Behind, teachers and administrators have a huge task. So what can parental involvement do? Parents can be involved as it can sometimes be a back burner issue. We all talk about it, but we want to, you know, enable them to continue to seek that involvement. Once we get that involvement, we can see what parents can do. As principals, district leaders, and teachers see what parents can do, they can have higher expectations of the parents. They're more open for partnerships with the parents, and they create more opportunities for collaboration with parents. So after we've attended this session, what are we sort of proposing for the next step? Made the presentation. We'll probably then take it to presentation to principals and district leaders. We'll have more information available on the site to the site councils. And here's a key thing is what we're going to ask the board for is to create a district parent steering team to develop a multi-year action plan to implement what we've brought back from San Antonio. Institute an evaluation process to audit current programs and monitor the impact of the action plan. So with this, I'll turn it over to Dr. All to close up.
If Stephanie were here, she would tell you how excited she was as we processed each day and came back together on the plane. She was already building her action plan for Central Elementary School. And she said it helped her figure out a way and an approach to really engage her parents and to engage all of the parents at Central Elementary School. And one of the things in her second year as principal this year that she had been struggling with is her approach in terms of leadership and matching that leadership with other parents in her school. She's already identified what she calls a parent leadership team concept, so she would have site council and the PTO, but also have the parent leadership training approach to really connect with parents and some parents who may not yet have been involved in a site council and not yet involved in a parent-teacher organization. And she feels like some of the opportunities maybe for training that we experienced, because what we experienced was the training that in shorter segments of what parents would receive, that this was a way that built trust, built that invitational piece, and gave them a pathway on how they could be a true partner in their child's academic education, whether they're at the elementary school, the junior high, or high school. And so she's already down the road with the concepts of her school community, as I think reflects the initiative that we have. Since our presentation at Site Council, I've had principals volunteer their schools. I think we've been contacted by some of the parents district-wide that would like to be involved maybe in a steering team process. I think we have some key staff members who would like to do that. We have Linda and Mike as board members who may want to make this an area that they want to get to continue to help us nurture as we move forward. And so I believe that the most concrete thing we can do next is really to put together that steering team that would include parents in the community and include some of our school principals, because to have that partnership in leadership, it's going to take that plus the teachers. Those three entities are so critical to our children's education. And so I think one of the things we may be ahead of in Olathe, and I think we heard that there, some of this was outside in these other communities because parents were trying to find a way to get access to data and information. One of the things that they complimented us on, the trainers, is that they looked on the Kansas website, our state report card, our school report cards. We're a step ahead of many states because our data, a lot of our data is out there. The way our data looks friendly. It's put out in a more user-friendly way than many other states across the nation. And then they were very interested, again, that we came as a team. And I think we learned that we enjoyed that process and gained above the training, and that hopefully any future training we would do would be around using a school community team that would include the principal, parents, and staff, teacher staff, so that there actually would be that greater capacity to move forward projects. And it's not necessarily a lone parent that has to be out there trying to figure out a solution, but that we would work together to figure out solutions and to raise achievement to higher levels for all kids. So with that, we take any questions.
Questions, comments?
Dr. All, what's the next step then?
The next step would be, if you support, we would put together a steering team, and we would do a call out to principals and site councils and determine who would like to sort of take this on. There are a lot of things on people's plates, and the steering team, I think, should represent the entire district. We may want to start with a couple of pilot locations as that, but I'd like to have those conversations in that steering team format to make sure that we have all the information and data present. I think Stephanie's going to raise her hand and say, well, you know, I'd like to be one of those pilot schools, and I think she's a step ahead, and so that might be one of our first to step out then and provide overall leadership to see if this kind of approach is really going to work. And we're really interested, I think, also in our middle level schools. I think parents in the school district, sometimes, you know, at elementary, it's very clear your child has one homeroom teacher. It's very clear, I think, how they can be involved. High school, there's so many programs that you can connect with by whether it's theater or other activities or debate or different competitions and athletics, of course. And there are a lot of booster connections. And at middle level, there's a transition in, there's just a beginning of exploration for kids. And so now they have maybe 5 teachers, 4 teachers, 6 teachers. And so looking for ways also, and that may be something that we really want to focus on as a steering team and how we can do that better in Olathe.
Other comments?
Dare we call this No Parent Left Behind?
Good. I like that.
If you dare.
I like that.
Well, I have a question for you all.
Why don't you guys come closer? Come in.
You know, we have no child left behind, and we have all kinds of things we do to consume our day and our policies and measurements and accountability. And was there any discussion about how you do that in a program like this? And it seems to me one of the first things we need to do with any kind of a group put together is determine what are the barriers that are keeping parents, and I don't know how much data we already have on that. You know, so it seemed to me that would be an important issue to tackle first, not let alone, I like the idea of pilot sites and, you know, start small and see if it works and then expand from there.
Yeah, and I think we know we could rattle off a few of the barriers that parents could say, whether it's a single parent home or 2 parents both working and trying to manage all the activities that their kids are in and all the responsibilities. So sometimes time is a barrier, sometimes just access to the school day is a barrier. So this is maybe a time to be innovative.
Yeah.
And think out of the box as well, and have parents at the table as we're doing that thinking.
Kudos to Mr. Poland for bringing this idea forward, and also for Dr. All for just immediately embracing this, as well as Ms. Wilhelm and Ms. Dansko. Just outstanding.
I would also add, in the site councils that I visited this fall, I saw a lot of momentum already from several of the schools to develop their own programs for parent involvement and parent leadership. So I think that definitely the momentum is there.
This provides a framework for the parents to have a starting point and provide development and training and encouragement.
And I want to make very clear, this would not be an intent to replace what is already there and to direct the leadership of existing parent groups and organizations. You know, there's a lot to do here, and we have a lot of capacity to achieve. And so I hope that we are very clear about that too, because we're very satisfied with what we have. But this may help us reach maybe some parents who have not been as connected or see a way for them to just be very supportive of the academics of their child. And we may learn some other things. We talked about the Olathe way earlier this evening. And this may not be the full package for us because we may, as we usually do, add on.
Great report.
Just real quickly, one of the things I liked about it also is basically, as big as we are, we can sort of get comfortable with the status quo. And I think one of the challenges I saw from this is this will give sometimes parents the ability to challenge the status quo, which I think is something that we need to have. Not from a negative standpoint, but just to challenge it to see if there's a better way of doing it. And I think one of the things we need to be receptive to is somebody challenging the status quo as a means of improving what we've already got going. So that's one of the things I really liked about the program.
Any other questions, comments? Excellent. Thank you so much for taking your time and energy and effort. It sounds like a different kind of paradigm for us to build on some good things we already have going on that can help us to be even better in the days ahead. Appreciate that. Next, we'll go to the Bond Task Force. Dr. All, as you get seated there, if you could bring forth some thought about that, please.
I wanted to share just an update of where we are in launching the Bond Task Force that you approved. We have been working fast and furious in a relatively compact period of time. And I want to thank personally Dr. Banikowski, Laura Lee Baker, and Rita Lyon for just taking this and really helping to move this forward. Because not only in developing our approach to this, but also in being so thoughtful in making connections with individuals in our community and with individual staff members to serve on this. We would hope very soon, within a couple of days, hopefully by Monday, to have a finalized list that would be available for the public and we would eventually post on our website, and also for the board, so you can see that the list. We still have some names where we're still in a communication stage of can they do it and making that commitment. And so if you're waiting for the list tonight, I don't have it quite ready to give you because I'd like to have a few of that firmed up before we roll that out. I can tell you right now that the capacity of the task force, there will be sort of 3 chunks of that task force in terms of focus. The entire group will kick off next Tuesday night, April 11th at 7 o'clock, and it'll go from 7 to 8:30. Dr. Drummond, myself, and others will be there to kind of help set the stage, and all board members, and it's a public meeting. Everyone who would like to attend is welcome to attend. Then the groups will divide into work groups, and one large group, which will be heavily community-based, is the task force that is really going to look at growth and our existing facilities. Another work group is the technology group that is bringing in experts from our community as well as our experts on staff, and to look at the technology plan and to look at findings there. And a third work group is the work group on academic excellence and some of the things coming down the road that we may need to look at that might have impact on facilities, whether that's full-day kindergarten and other kinds of topics that impact academic programming or where academic programming is impacting facilities. They have identified sessions, and then all 3 will come back together to share findings. And out of that process, we hope to have that first whole round completed by the end of May. There may be an extension needed to continue to work on findings. This is something that, we can't always predict, so we've got plenty of time there to extend the process. We're trying to be very respectful of people's time. What we have secured, I think right now we're slightly over 85 individuals, both parents and staff members and community members that will be involved in this process. So I think you're going to see it as touching every school community in this school district as we've gone through. Sometimes a person's had to wear 3 hats. They might be a parent, a business person, and they have a child at elementary, junior high, and high school. So most of the people, when you see the background, we've had nominations from others in the community, self-nominations, nominations by staff, nominations or suggestions by the board, and we hope that we have put together a very representative group moving forward. So I'll just take any questions that maybe I haven't addressed.
Where is the meeting, Tuesday?
Oh, all the meetings are here at the Education Center in the boardroom. I'm looking at Dr. Banikowski for her to reassure me that that's true.
Yes, that is true. That is true. We do. All things are at the education at the boardroom, except for example, the technology group is going on some site visits to take a look at some things, and existing facilities may need to do some site visits as well. We recently were talking about a bus trip. So there may be some off-site, but predominantly the meetings are here. We do have those dates already identified for our subgroups as well as the whole groups. We have the predominant of the committee is already together. There were just a few loose ends that we're cleaning up, and Ms. Baker was ill today, so she wasn't able to finalize the last piece there. Any other questions, though, on?
Questions? Thank you very much, all of you, for the very
Tuesday
hard
night.
work. We appreciate it. Going to be very fruitful, I'm sure. Okay, let's go to our budget development update. Mr. Diener?
Dr. All, were you going to make some introductory comments?
Yes. I just wanted to do a quick intro for Mr. Diener on the budget development process. I think, as the board could attest to, the document that Gary's been working on has a lot of labor of love in it, and work and input. And I know that both Mr. Churchman and Mr. Gilmore, also as 2 board members in this interest area, as we've had other board members working on a variety of projects. I think we have a long list of projects that each of the board members have been working on, so everyone is keeping very busy. But I just want to recognize that there's been a lot of effort on this. I think we've really moved forward in making sure that we're at an even better place in terms of our planning process. What you're hearing tonight is earlier than what we've had before. And so you might see something on a list of identified projects that you may say, well, Pat, is that something we're really going to do, or where does this fall in priority? And I've told Mr. Diener, the group has worked the prioritizations there, depending on available resources and some continued discussions and input from the board. We may prioritize and reprioritize a couple of times before we come to a final list of what we're moving forward on, particularly in those areas that might be new initiatives or new positions. So we're in process. This is an opportunity for the board to learn, listen, give input, and we can be back. We've got time to be back next month for continued dialogue about that. So.
Thank you. Dr. All had also asked me to just share real quickly with the board and all the and the public as well a website that we're working on in business and finance. And one of the things that we already have a website that provides some limited amount of information on the budget, but I did want to show that so far right now, and it's still a work in process, but on the budget and finance side, we have opportunities of looking at the complete annual budget, and you will notice from this the copies of the budget in its totality. It downloads very quickly. If someone wanted to print off 199 pages, they could do so. On the other hand, if they would rather just look at some popular budget reports, and that may be strange.
That's
but,
Gary's terminology, not other people's. That's the word popular is kind of an oxymoron.
We may go
with
favorites
budget.
or something like that.
Gary, I don't have any trouble with that. That's good.
Is that okay? Okay. We can look at bond history at a glance, and we can go back and look all the way back to can't see my, there we go. We can look all the way back to 1965, the bond that was passed at that time, the projects that were involved, all the way back down to the last project that was passed in 2003. We can look at district grants, free and reduced counts in the building, projected enrollments, projected expenditures for, this is right out of the budget document showing and comparing last year's actuals with the budget that was approved for this year. Even it's some information on the student side, on ACT results and things like this. And so hopefully this is going to be an attempt to provide our public with greater access to the information, and we're hoping to get this online in the next month or so. So did want to give you an update on that. As we move forward, I want to reiterate what Dr. All had said, and that is that we're trying to do something this evening that we have not done in the past. And there's about 5 concepts that we're going to touch on. Probably each one of those concepts could be a workshop in its own. And so I hope you don't feel like I'm trying to just gloss over some of the topics, but I want to be respectful of your time this evening, and I've tried to pace this for about 10 or 15 minutes. We can go much longer if you choose and have additional questions. I'll leave that up to you. But there's about 5 areas that we're going to be looking at. As we look at the district, we're going to be looking at it from the perspective this evening that there are, over here on the left side, there are needs that the district has, whether or not it's for curriculum instruction or if it's capital needs. And on the right side in the red, we're going to have opportunities for revenue. And what are those sources and what do they look like? And stabilizing everything is our financial stability. And where we're going to start this evening is with that financial stability picture, and that is the cash balance reserve policy that we've already started talking about a little bit. After that, we're going to look at the action plans in support of the board's strategic goals, and we're going to look at the capital needs for the district. We're then going to look on the right side, that balancing act of looking at the operating budget projections. What do we think we might be seeing for next year? Obviously, that's a tremendous crystal ball look because the legislature has proposed some initiatives, but that's still in the works. To start with then, the first topic is the cash balance reserve, and that was a packet in and of itself. It had narrative plus also some graphs. This is a new look at it, and I want to thank the board members that participated in this process. Mr. Gilmore helped get us started on the objectives point of view, and I think by looking at the 2 objectives, and I'll go ahead and put both of them up here, I think it gives us a nice basis by which we can look at this whole topic. The first objective is the whole concept of cash flow. One of the reasons we need to have cash balances is for cash flow, and we're going to look at that and some graphs of that. The second objective is we need it for contingencies. 2 areas of contingencies: one for those unforeseen expenditures, whether or not it's utility bills that are going up, or whether or not on Part B it's unanticipated shortfalls in funding, where 4 years ago we saw that the state actually, once the year had started, reduced the base state aid, the funding, by $20 per student. So we need those contingencies. Those are the basis for this approach of looking at cash-based reserves are based on these 2 objectives. As we get into that, though, we need the premise is all based on looking at 3 different categories. The 3 categories that we have divided this particular view into are those that deal with the operating and dependent funds, capital outlay funds, and those that we're going to call independent restricted funds. We can talk at length about each of those and decide exactly where they need to belong, but I believe that we can substantiate the reasons for why we have Category 1 are that those are the funds whose revenue, the majority of the revenue, comes from the operating funds, from the general fund or the local option budget. And therefore, that's what sustains those funds. And if we, in one year, transfer dollars that are more than are necessary cash balances, we can bring those back in future years, not actually in a transfer, but through the process of working with the budget. On category number 3, those are independent. and by virtue of the nature of how those funds work, their revenue sources are, the majority of those sources are outside of the operating funds, and they are dedicated to the support of those funds. Whether it be user fees, state or federal funds, they are committed to those particular funds, and that's the only way those funds can be spent. So to even look at those funds or the cash balances that are there as opportunities for other purchases, for other uses within the operating budget, simply is not a possibility. And then the second category then there we see there is capital outlay fund. And the capital outlay fund really in some ways could be in category 1 or category 2. But because of its size and because it's directly associated with its own mill levy, we've chosen to look at that one specifically by itself. Let's look at objective number 1. Objective number 1 talks about cash flow, and the board has a fold-out that shows all the funds in their categories with their unencumbered cash balances per month for the last 2 years. That was too much information for this slide. And so what we decided to do is, rather than to try to put the documentation, we went instead with a graph. And what this graph shows is, and I apologize for the horizontal axis not being able to see it very well, but essentially this is from June of the year until November of the year. And then once again, and that was the year 04-05. In this graph then over here we have June of the year through December of the year of this past, well, I guess it's the current fiscal year, 05-06. What we're trying to show there is that the cash balances fluctuate tremendously throughout the year. And typically, historically, the largest cash balance always occurs in June, only to be depleted throughout the year to where it reaches its lowest level in November or December of each year. And so what we're trying to say with objective number 1 is that we need to look at what those differences are. What is that difference between the highest level and the lowest level each year? And what we're showing here is that in last year's fiscal budget, that difference, that cash flow difference was around $27 million compared to this year about $25 million. So the first objective says that we must maintain at least enough funding in our cash balances to cover for the cash flow, which simply means that if we would have gone into this year with $25.5 million, in December, there would have been $0, which simply means that if anything else would have happened, whether revenue would have been impacted in some way or unanticipated expenditures would have hit that were not available, we could have been in a severe cash flow problem.
Gary, let me if I could just clarify one point there.
Yes.
If we had no reserves beyond
25, yes.
If you look back on this chart, we had about 10 million
Correct.
beyond that. But if we had made a policy to be at 0, then there wouldn't have been additional money to meet those needs.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the clarification. So that's the concept for objective number 1, addressing cash flow. Objective number 2 talks about contingencies. And I'm using the same graph, the same information, and Mr. Gilmore gave a great lead into that because in this objective, we're looking at that bottom difference. In other words, looking at the lowest level of cash balance in 04-05, we saw that it was down to about 11 million in November. Looking at that lowest cash balance this current year, it was down to 14 million. Therein lies the question that we need to decide, and that is what amount is appropriate? Is 0 appropriate? Is that too small? Is 14 too large? Where do we need to fall in that area to be comfortable? As we look at the contingencies a little further, we would just point out that the contingency reserve and the self-insurance funds, self-insurance covers 2 important factors, the risk management and the workers' compensation. And what we're suggesting here is that if objective 2 is met predominantly by these 2 concepts, the contingency reserve for years has been 4%. That is, the potential for that can go up to 6% this year. This is the range that would be reflected of that, between 4.6 million and 8.4. Self-insurance, once again, this is all information that's in your packet, is being recommended by the state insurance and also our third-party administrator at being at a level of around 145% of anticipated expenses for that year. That would correspond to about 1.4 million. If we were to add these two concepts up, we would see that the level of cash balances that needs to be available for contingencies probably needs to be in the range of $7 to almost $10 million, somewhere in there. What we're suggesting in the documentation is that we look at a number that represents 4% of the total operating budgets. And as you see on a slide that we'll hit pretty soon, if we look at a 4% level of all operating budgets, that provides a contingency fund goal of around $7 million, which is on the low end of that. Once again, that's something that the board can determine. Yes?
Before we get too far off the slide, just help me with the cash flow and, like what?
That one on the cash flow?
Yeah, that's the right one. November of '04, we're down to our lowest, and then all of a sudden we get a big influx of cash.
Yeah, that comes from, there's two major revenue sources that come in from the county on June and January of every year. And that provides the majority of all the funding for the local option budget, capital outlay, and a lot of other funds.
And then, so when we go down to our low level there, I'm sure that, help educate me, that those are forced payments there, that they can't be spread out to when we get the cash in January?
Correct. Well, payroll is probably the biggest one.
Okay.
We offer $10 million a year, and a lot of people would love it early. Probably aren't going to live with putting it off.
All right, thank you.
Okay. As we look at objective number 2, as it relates to capital outlay fund, I just wanted to bring back a slide that I thought might be helpful to us again as a reminder, and that is as we compare our contingency capital outlay fund with others across the state. And what we've selected here are the 10 largest districts in the state of Kansas and all of the Johnson County districts. And I always feel uncomfortable sharing other school districts' information publicly, and so we've identified those as districts A through, I think, M there. But just pointing out that right now, with our current goal of 3% cash balance, this line shows where we are as we compare with the other 10 largest and also all the Johnson County schools. If we look at the state average, right now a 3% goal actually puts us under the state average. We earlier, I think this was in December, looked at and talked about concepts of 2.5% and 2% for goals. Once again, just bringing to the surface those conversations we had as it relates to Objective 2, contingencies, specifically within Category 2 of the Capital Outlay Fund. So what's the impact of all that narration that has been provided to the board on the actual cash balance reserves? We put this slide together because it sort of pulls it all together, all the information. It talks about the 3 different categories of operating dependent funds, the capital outlay fund, and those funds that are independent of the operating funds. We look at the cash balances that existed last June at year end, which was around $98 million. We look at the Objective 1, if we were to use these goals that we're talking about for Objective 1 of cash balance, this could be arranged in many different ways. Right now, I think it's presented that we would use the largest cash flow variance of the last 2 years. We could say that should be the average of the last 3 years, or average of the last 5 years. I mean, there's many ways in which we could look at that. For purposes of discussion this evening, this is the one we're presenting. Notice that we do not have cash flow issues for capital outlay and independent restricted funds. They're just simply not necessary because of the nature of those particular funds. Objective 2, though, applies to the operating, and that is the contingency we talked about, and we're suggesting that the operating funds for this year are about $176 million. If we were to take 4% of that, and if that were to be a value that we looked at, that would represent around $7 million. Looking at the capital outlay fund, Objective 2, looking at 3%, makes that around $11.4 million. We have our totals. We see then that if this plan, or this view of how we look at cash reserves was in place last June, we would have had cash balances of around 93 million compared to the 98, which simply means that available funds for reprioritization within the district under that goal structure would have provided an opportunity of accessing an additional 5.6 million. Now, one sort of easy way of looking at that is the whole Johnson County Economic Grant scenario. We talked about the fact for a long time that we were building our reserves for the eventuality that the sales tax did not pass. That's roughly $5 million. And so to say that that $5 million is available, even in excess of that, would simply be to say that we were in a position where we wanted to be, but now we can develop a plan that perhaps allows us to have access to that under a planned strategy. One way of looking at it. So what are the steps towards this? Number one, I think we need to review and discuss the placement of those funds. Obviously, we need to agree that Category 3 needs to be there, and Category 1, those dependent funds are where they need to be. We need to talk about the cash flow related to Objective 1 and agree that that makes sense, that the cash flow that's a foundation for cash balances that need to exist. Number two, look at the percentage of operating and dependent funds to meet Objective 2. What do we feel comfortable with? And that's that whole topic of everyone feels differently about life insurance and everything else, and contingencies are no different. Number four, we need to determine percent of fixed assets for capital outlay. We've talked about that one numerous times in the past. And number five, then, we'd just like to suggest that the staff would like to continue working on a plan at the direction of the board so that we continue to work on the budget development throughout the year. Right now, whether or not it be this way of thinking or some modifications of that, we would go from there. Which brings us to the conclusion of the first of four topics this evening. Shall I keep going? Okay.
Well, let's pause. Any questions of what Mr. Diener's presented so far? I don't want to lose the questions you might have.
It's a lot of information.
Yeah, I have some comments, but if there's questions before that, I'd be happy to let those go.
Fire.
Okay. First off, Mr. Diener, not only this component of your presentation, but the remainder of it, you continue to exceed yourself. Thank you very much. This brings tremendous clarity to a very complicated discussion. And I'm just going to give the board some of my views. I think the whole finance picture remains unclear. There's a lot of unknowns that have to come to bear yet before we can really start to manipulate the data and look at those kinds of things. I view the fact that we've got a tremendous amount of initiatives this year that we're going to need to fund. We've talked about deferred maintenance. That's certainly a priority. Technology. There's a lot of different things as we focus on balance. And I want to preface all this by saying, in my view, it's still very, very premature here. I struggle with being able to leave that kind of money in contingency on the table. I think that we as a board need to look at taking those numbers, and I'm talking about the 4% of operating funds and the 3% of contingency, down further. What does further mean? I don't know until the whole picture on state finance comes into play. But I think with all the things that we've got to do this year, and then particularly with the looming tax picture on the horizon in the state of Kansas, we really need to look at maximizing the use of our money. And I struggle with, even though we're still early in the game here, with the $19.5 million in contingency. I think the $27 million that you've outlined, I'm comfortable with that at the time being. But I just want to put my thoughts into the rest of the minds of the board members. Personally, from a planning perspective, I think this is a fine road to go down, but I think we need to be open-minded that it will need to have discussion for potential adjustment. Mm-hmm. And one other point that I do want to make, I think Mr. Poland said it very eloquently a number of meetings ago about if you take the $7 million and $11.5 million and combine them, that is, at least in my way of thinking, a bit of protection for the perfect storm. And so we need to take a look and say, based on historical uses and things of that nature, do we view that we need to have that full allotment in our pocket?
Okay. Thank you.
Other comments?
Well, I know that you're going to address that. I did see it in our notebooks. But when you think about the Johnson County sales tax, and we're planning 3 years from now because we also planned for it may or may not pass, I thought I read in there there is a plan, is that correct?
Correct, uh-huh.
Okay, and that looks like we will start accumulating some funds to offset that in 3 years, we're going to be back to a possibility of zero support. Is that correct?
Yes. A little different philosophy than what we had the first time through in the first 3 years. The philosophy now going forward would be that we would somewhat take away our reliance on the sales tax, maybe a third of that total amount each year, to where the third year we would be totally freed ourselves, so to speak, from ongoing cost, so that at the completion of that, we could move on to the next year without feeling a tremendous need to have reductions in the district.
And you've got a list, Mr. Diener, of strategies or potential uses for that money that the staff has come up with. And
Yes.
I think it would be prudent to share that with the board to give you feedback as to are those the kinds of uses that we would endorse as we start to, if any, as we continue down that planning path.
Okay.
One question I have on that and would be, I don't know what our schedule is for workshop, but I know that this is a subject that probably, at least in my mind, requires some discussion and some interaction in that discussion. So maybe we can do that in the period of time tonight. That's just a question that I'm going to ask.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions before Mr. Diener goes on? We can come back and,
I just wanted to comment on one thing, if I could, Dr. Drummond. When we started talking about this some months ago, and you looked at the fact that we had $98 million in cash at the end of the year, and as I talked to some legislators, everybody kind of looks at that money, looks at that balance and chokes on it, saying, what are you doing with all that money? This really puts a clear perspective as to why that's there, and it's not that we just like to sit on a lot of money. I mean, there's reasons for it. The art's going to come down to, is it 4%? Is 3% on capital outlay the right number? And that's the discussion we have yet to have. And again, we're going to come to a collective decision, but there's a lot of probably individual different preferences as to what the right numbers are there. I agree with Mr. Churchman's statement about that. So as we look to find time to discuss this, whether it's now or in a work study session or whatever, I want to just encourage everybody to focus on those two aspects. Okay. That's where we've got to put our attention to give staff direction once we know more about the school finance issue. Is 4% enough, or should we spend it down and use it for some of these important things that are out there that we're still prioritizing, or is 3% too much, and those kinds of questions. So
I do agree.
Okay.
I just would like to comment, the same as Mr. Church, Mr. Gilmore said, this really is the essence. Yeah. And we've arrived at the essence, and we've gotten to where, I think in January, I asked what it would look like if we were at 4% or 3% or 6%.
Yes.
Or 5%. Okay. But, and I agree with Mr. Churchman, it's early in the process, and although it's nice to have this information, we're going to need to have some assurance of what the level of funding is going to be from the state before we can make any kind of commitment on this.
Absolutely.
Because without having that information, I'm not prepared to make any decision in regards to our reserves or what our goal should be without knowing what the level of funding is going to be ongoing from the state. I think it would be irresponsible for us to take that kind of action now without knowing that. And there's been a lot of discussion at the state about a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, and which would be nice to know from a budgeting standpoint. But I'm not. I would just be satisfied with a 1-year plan right now. So for us to plan longer than 1 year, again, would be difficult for me, and I think it would be. I would have to think long and hard about that, changing significantly without knowing what it looks like in year 2 and in year 3, and because we do know that the $5 million sales tax is would have to be reauthorized and based on all the needs that we see at the county, $500 some million of needs. I think that we need to take the approach that it would be quite suspect if we would have that again in 2 years, 2 more budget years. So, all that being said, is the last place I go for money is my sack of money that I have for reserve, because if I ever and I notice this with families, if you ever take it out, it's difficult to put it back. if not impossible. So,
And I totally agree with what Mr. Parker has said. And the big unknown is what's the finance decision in the state of Kansas? Look at the current House plan. I kind of call that, it's akin to the rolling roof plan. It would require the doubling of property tax and 2% on sales tax in order to fund that plan. So we have to ask ourselves, is that realistic? That's out of our control right here. But once we do know that, then we can start to look at the triggers and say, do we want to touch them or don't we? And balance that against all the initiatives we've got.
Well, Mr. Parker, I wanted to respond to your comment about not wanting to make a decision without knowing more about the finance formula. I totally agree with you. But I think we have one distinct advantage now that we didn't have last year, and that's especially with our newer board members having to make a vote on a budget without knowing why do we have all these, we've articulated the reasons for these cash reserves, whether we agree the number's right or not. Right. I think we've done a job of articulating why they're there. So if we come down to an August timeframe or whenever it is that we finally get approval from the courts or whomever's going to do this, I think we'll have more knowledge about how we're making that decision. And that makes me very comfortable, whatever the numbers are going to turn out to be. So, Gary, I appreciate the work you've done here.
Thank you.
yeah, and I would agree with that as well. We can justify and we can take a responsible action
Right.
on that in August because we have done all this pre-work.
Is that the tornado warning?
I was hoping that wasn't a
I
tornado
think that's my
warning.
time.
I have one other question, and that is, and maybe this has been answered and just clarified, and that is, what kind of impact if our decision is not made until August? And obviously, we do have to look at what the legislature is doing, no question about that. But what kind of impact does that have on our programs? Does it have impact on those programs that, and I don't know if that can be answered, but I think it's a question that we've asked before and needs to be asked again.
And it would be our intent to provide that information when those decisions are being made, that if we're going to go down a certain path that would require certain reductions to be determined, or we can maintain the services as normal, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure, Mrs. Wilhelm, are you indicating, we are in, you heard a human resources report at the beginning of this meeting. Am I going down the line you were thinking? And we have students pre-enrolled. They're going to show up in a few short months for August, and we have to have teachers in every classroom. And so we're going to be back, we could be back, I'm not saying we're going to be back, we could be back where we were last year. We had a little practice now in this. Some of the distinct differences are from last year is, number one, we do have more board knowledge across the entire board, superintendent knowledge. I'm getting better at this, And then secondly, we still have to fall back, though, on, I think Kevin called it the art. There's a little art to the decision-making here. And so what I'm working with staff on is, okay, how much can we release on positions, whether it's reading teachers, math specialists for Title I, other kinds of needs, while we still can get them and get the quality people that are out there, because this is a very competitive field, particularly for the quality that we want to bring in. And then at the same time, and move initiatives forward at the same time, knowing that compensation is going to be the biggest chunk of any dollars, and probably negotiations will be put on hold until we know that. And so it will be a balance. Part of this will be to what level that we can assume some confidence that there will be X amount of dollars at least to work with, unless something catastrophic should happen. And so we're working through that process at the same time, because I've released positions for growth. I think last week we passed 25,008 kids. Remember, we started out about 300 and some, less than that, September 20th. We've grown over 300 net since September 20th. And so we know they're here. They're here right now that weren't in the previous count that are going to be in next year's count. And a whole lot are going to come between now and August. And so 1,200 showed up in August last year. Now, that wasn't all net, so that we didn't know about in May. So we're going to make some assumptions. We have to make some assumptions moving forward, but at the same time, we can't make those assumptions for fully settling salaries, how much that could be, because it's such a significant part of it. And I don't know if I'm getting at, Gary, what you
Okay.
agree to there. So we'll have to bring some additional conversation back to the board about where we are and how we're taking this part of the planning process, because we're almost planning, we're implementing in the opposite way you would normally want to do this. And when will the budget be finalized?
August.
August. And when do students arrive?
August.
When does the new fiscal year start?
In July.
July. And that's the normal pattern. And when do we typically get funding in a good year? Know the funding approximate?
We usually at the end of May, April, early May.
In April, early May. And last year, when do we know it?
It's mid-July.
In late July, yeah.
It was late in July, yes.
Late July, yeah.
That's right.
And so, there's going to be a part of some of this crunch that is out of our circle of influence.
Absolutely.
And so what we're trying to do is have as much influence about what we think we know and can do, and have as much early knowledge so that when we have to start making some decisions, we're ready to do it and can move forward. So,
Aren't we also saying, Gary, that if we don't know anything, we're proceeding along current law, and we're utilizing these assumptions, which are all still fluid until it comes down to the end, when we have to approve the final budget?
Correct.
I mean, we got to move forward with something.
yeah. And I think that's a good point for the board to understand. We have to make some of those assumptions, or we can't open school in the fall.
Right.
And I completely agree with that. The only exception I would take to it is on contingency reserve and self-insurance. I think we should focus as a board based on what we feel we need rather than what the state allows us from a maximum perspective. And we should couple with that what we've used from a historical perspective. And so what I'm getting down to in layman's terms is, do we agree to allocate money from a 4% contingency to a 6% contingency for 1 year, or do we stay at 4, something in between? I think those are the kinds of things we can begin to banner about. I think a workshop would be a great idea as we know more. And those are just some of the options we have in front of us.
Okay. Moving forward.
Please proceed.
Okay. I'm just in summary, I'm hearing though that while we're not going to make approvals for the amounts that we're talking about, is the concept of these objectives making sense? We've presented about 3 different scenarios over the last 8 months. Is this the one that we can at least maybe, while we don't know the specifics of it, does the concepts make sense to move forward? I'm getting. Okay. I moved off of this because this is difficult enough for some people to watch, and I think this might have lulled us to sleep. So we now have looked at the cash balance reserve policy. Next, we want to move to the left side of the balance, so to speak, of our needs. And we've broken this into 2 areas. One, dealing with action plans in support of the